before going 4-11-1 in 2020, quite the turnaround. Owner Jeffrey Lurie said the decision to move on from Peterson was not specific to quarterback Carson Wentz or one position group, focusing instead on the regression of the offense overall. But Stephen A., do you think this was the right move to fire Doug Peterson?
I do not. I do not believe that. I think that when you've been to the playoffs the last 3 years, you missed the playoffs for the first time in 4 years, you delivered the first Super Bowl championship in the entire franchise history just 3 years ago, and you're let go. I think that you deserve a little bit more latitude than that. That's just my personal opinion. I understand Jeffrey Lurie. I know him a little bit, and I respect the hell out of him. I don't know if I agree with this decision. I think that Doug Peterson earned the right to come back and make amends for an absolutely atrocious season. And there's no way to get around that. His relationship with Carson Wentz was a factor. I do not believe Jeffrey Lurie when he says that Carson Wentz played no role in Doug Peterson's demise, because obviously with the commitment that's been made to Carson Wentz and how you're stuck with, with a $59 million hit in the event that you let him go or whatever. This is what he's going to count against the cap next year. That's a tough position to be in, and I think that you got to find a way to make it work. I understand the thinking. I just think that if I'm the Eagles, I give Doug Peterson an opportunity to make amends. He's widely respected in the National Football League, particularly as a play caller. He's not deemed clueless or anything like that. It was just a bad year, and I think that he should have an opportunity to make amends for that. Unfortunately, that's not the case, and I think he's the fall guy, when obviously some people would say it should have been Howie Roseman. Some people would say it should have been Carson Wentz. I just think it was the wrong move to make when it comes to Doug Peterson. That's just my personal opinion.
Peterson had to go. He had to go. And apparently, Stephen A., from what I understand, he wanted to make Press Taylor, who's the passing game coordinator and quarterbacks coach, he wanted to make him offensive coordinator because Doug Peterson, I think foolishly, is trying to fix Wentz, right? So clearly his firing is because he's the fall guy. They need a fall guy. They're going to make Peterson the fall guy. Really, his mistake was the time to stand up to Jeffrey Lurie, the time to stand up to ownership and management, GM Howie Roseman, and say, no, this is what I have to do. I need to be able to pick my own staff, which he has not been able to do, was right after he won the Super Bowl, or even after the defense of the Super Bowl, which was a great title defense, right? Like, that with Nick Foles, again, they go to Soldier Field and they beat the Bears, and they go to New Orleans and come one dropped pass away from getting to the NFC Championship game. So, that's the time when you have leverage to stand up and say, wait a minute, I need to be able to choose my own staff. This is what I need to be able to do. He didn't. He let that go by. It got worse and worse, and frankly, now didn't have the leverage to say, make this guy my guy, and he becomes the fall guy. No, my problem is not, though, getting rid of Peterson. My problem is, what's Howie Roseman still doing there? I mean, obviously, Carson Wentz is done. I can't sit here and seriously argue, they need to stick with Carson Wentz. Why is Peterson the fall guy? What has Howie Roseman done? He hasn't Arcega-Whiteside over DK Metcalf. Is that what he's done? Rager over Justin Jefferson. Is that what he's done? He hasn't selected a Pro Bowler in the draft in half a decade. And the cap is a mess. Their whole cap situation's a mess. So why isn't Roseman gone at least with Peterson, if not before him? And Stephen A., Jeffrey Lurie should know better, as you know from your time in Philadelphia. He weighed in, backing McNabb in a fractured locker room, the TO thing. And by the way, that was the right thing to do, I think. I think that was the right thing to do. McNabb is the greatest quarterback in franchise history, but they did finish 6-10 that year. And taking sides, even if it was the right thing to do, maybe it wasn't smart in that moment, but at any rate, that should have informed him what that can do to a locker room. This locker room clearly prefers Jalen Hurts. And what it seems like is that Carson Wentz wields a lot of power to the point where the coach becomes the fall guy. I think Peterson should have been gone. If you want to argue, so should Roseman, so should Wentz, well, then we agree. But Peterson had to go.
I'm not going to disagree with you about Roseman and the points that you made. I'm going to sit up there and say this to you. If Peterson, first of all, I think you were wrong about the leverage that he had when he won the Super Bowl. If he was never allowed to pick his staff, and as a result, that was the staff that was assembled by Howie Roseman and Jeffrey Lurie and those boys. And that's what won them the Super Bowl. Why would Peterson suddenly have leverage for winning the Super Bowl when they could make the argument, no, it was because of the staff we surrounded you by. The fact that we picked this team and we delivered the Super Bowl championship, why do we need to change course now? I think that would be the argument against Peterson having the leverage that you alluded to him being in a position to have. So I disagree with that. That's number one. Number two, when we talk about Roseman, no disagreement there because your points are valid. What I would say to you is because Peterson didn't have that kind of clout, that's a reason to give him a pass because he was subjected to being forced to deal with circumstances that were out of his control, that was not of his doing. And so as a result of that, why point the finger of blame at him when it's clear that that wasn't the case? Unless Jeffrey Lurie, who obviously is the owner and he would know better than any of us, it wasn't that way for Peterson. That's why Peterson is gone, because he gave the power to Peterson, power that we may not have known that Peterson had. And Peterson was the one who made those calls instead of Roseman. That seems to be the only logical thing to deduce from all of this in light of the fact that Roseman is still there and Peterson is gone. Unless, of course, we ultimately find out that Howie Roseman is ending up out the door as well. Then it would make more sense that it was obviously both of them instead of just Peterson.
Well, look, here's the thing about Peterson. When you say, no, he didn't have the leverage and all this, Peterson, all the quarterbacks except for Wentz, other than his rookie season, other than that first great year where he got hurt, perform well with Peterson. And the common thread is they'll follow a game plan. Like Carson Wentz, Stephen A. clearly at some point got the message that he doesn't have to listen to coach. I mean, clearly at some point he got that message. Coach has to stand up for himself at a certain point. He's got to do it. You're not wrong about Lurie putting a GM or whatever, a brain trust in place that did put a team together that won a Super Bowl. Just as I said, Lurie wasn't wrong to back Donovan McNabb, right? But the fact is, even in the McNabb case, a great in his prime quarterback, all that. In this case, what wound up happening is who got backed in Carson Wentz, maybe the worst starting quarterback in football, on a team where, the locker room obviously prefers the other guy, Jalen Hurts. No, I think a big part of Peterson's issue with Wentz is Wentz had the sense that he had more power in the organization than Peterson did.
All right.
That his relationship with Carson Wentz was a factor. I do not believe Jeffrey Lurie when he says that Carson Wentz played no role in Doug Peterson's demise, because obviously with the commitment that's been made to Carson Wentz and how you're stuck with, with a $59 million hit in the event that you let him go or whatever. This is what he's going to count against the cap next year. That's a tough position to be in, and I think that you got to find a way to make it work. I understand the thinking. I just think that if I'm the Eagles, I give Doug Peterson an opportunity to make amends. He's widely respected in the National Football League, particularly as a play caller. He's not deemed clueless or anything like that. It was just a bad year, and I think that he should have an opportunity to make amends for that.